Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Um, and offering prayers and peace upon all of the prophets, guides, and messengers for their um, sharing with us the insights from the Almighty. And we ask peace and blessings on all of them, those we know and those we don't know. And that we might follow the best of their guidance and advice through these difficult times. I, I want to open, I hope, this discussion looking at issues of violence within the faith tradition of Islam, and proposing that there are multiple narratives in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But to begin by saying that I think that in the world we live in today, unfortunately, um, the world is in a great state of violence, and our capacity to be able to deliver weapons of really mass destruction is at a level unprecedented in the history of mankind. And unfortunately, many of the conflicts in and around the world have something to do with countries where there are large Muslim populations. There's also the concern about Muslim radicalization. Uh, and when I say Muslim, those who are reading from the text of Islam and who have an interpretation which is extremist and violent. Not that that is the only narrative, and we're going to talk about a contravening narrative in our discourse today. Um, also, to look at the need for a kind of intervention and education around the paradigm of the use of violence as a medium for social change. And to draw out of this, I hope, some words from the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that should give us some guidance into his approach that might benefit us in this conflict. I want to really start out by looking at issues uh, like in most of the conflicts that we're seeing. When we see violent extremists, I'll take Al Qaeda, Taliban, or others, that maybe 85% of the people that they actually kill are their co-religionists, whether this is the violence in Sudan or in Iraq or Afghanistan. Today is Friday, and undoubtedly scores of Muslims will be killed in Pakistan, usually at the hand of a co-religionist who's taking advantage of the crowds of the Friday prayer to hide in so that they can engage in acts of violence against the state. No doubt Palestine and the Palestinian and Israeli conflict as another source, and unfortunately you can look again and see that the overwhelming death toll is between factions of Fatah and Hamas and others. I'd like to talk about uh, the narrative of violence within the Islamic paradigm, and say that I believe that largely this is a function of how people have interpreted, many Muslims have interpreted, the significant elements of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. These books of his biography are commonly referred to as Sirah. Uh, but unfortunately, the most popularized books of his history are not the history of his life, but the history of his battles. And one of the most prominent among them, a book called The Sealed Nectar, or Ar-Rahiq Maktoum. And when we look at Ar-Rahiq Maktoum, uh, uh, it is not um, the Prophet's whole life, but really a handful of battles which have been used to define the Prophet's methodology. Uh, and that narrative has become a dominant narrative. It is the narrative of violence. Muslims were an oppressed minority. They withstood for a while. Um, they sought refuge in Ethiopia. um, in which a Christian king, the Prophet ﷺ, informed them, will take them in. He is a righteous person. And then they migrate to the city of Yathrib, which again takes them in as a city known to have a significant Jewish population, as well as Sabians or Sabiites, some people call them, some types of monotheists who are there, and those who would like to convert to Islam. And they migrate there, and again, that city is under siege after a number of years, over and over again, attacks and battles, and the Muslims are now have to take a defensive position. There is the outreach to the Romans and the Persians, and that nonviolent outreach, the consequence is that the Persians and the Romans declare a state of war by killing the emissaries, and vis-a-vis that, the Muslims are caught up again in this ongoing jihad, to the degree that there are those who are of this school of thought who then describe that the prophetic message leads us in a state in which jihad, fi sabilillah, striving or struggling for Islam, is something that will continue until the Day of Judgment. Now, this narrative, particular narrative of the prophetic message, has been made free and very accessible by way of distribution, to the degree that it has become the sort of dominant narrative in the minds of Muslims. And children in Sunday schools can spout off the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of Khaybar, the Battle of Tabuk. It's a handful of battles, but they can, Fatih Makkah, they can rattle them off because that is the dominant narrative. I would like to offer up a different narrative, and that is a narrative of the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, who sees the opportunity in his society to engage in the civil strife in Mecca by negotiating a treaty in Mecca which removed the threat of civil war, this Half al-Fudul. We have that the Prophet ﷺ engages in a non-violent and negotiated relationship with the people of Ethiopia. That the movement to Yathrib, the city which would become later known as Medina, again is a manifestation of a non-violent engagement. Even the Battle of the Trench is an attempt for the Prophet ﷺ not to fight, but to engage in a non-violent resistance. Even when we look at the great turning point in the prophetic life, which is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, 10 years of non-violence. The Muslims take every strike against them in a negotiated peace for 10 years. Now I'm going to do some quick mathematics, and then hopefully we'll have a robust dialogue. First, only about 100 people migrated from Mecca to Yathrib, the city which we would call Medina. After 13 years of preaching in Mecca, only 100 people. The migration to Yathrib, after 6 years, when they make their journey attempting to go to Mecca, they have 1,500 people who are performing the pilgrimage. They sign a peace treaty for 10 years, which lasts only 2.5 years. And in that 2.5 years, after the breaking of that treaty, the Prophet marches to Mecca with an army of 10,000. That army of 10,000, he's in 2.5 years of nonviolence, of dialogue, of outreach, of engagement, he now has 10,000 supporters. They march to Mecca and tell the Meccans that we didn't come here to fight, we came here to establish peace, and it was effectively a bloodless revolution. I think that is the narrative, and that out of Hudaybiyah is the place in which the Prophet ﷺ gains the real foothold, not through violence.